Well, good morning, everyone, from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and it is a delight to welcome you to the Forum, the first installment of the Forum in 2025. And on this first Sunday in 2025, we're going to be looking back at a key event that some of us participated in 2024, which is the St. Bart's Camino de Santiago pilgrimage that all the folks sitting up here were participants in October of 2024. And we are excited to, at last, share an overview and some details of that trip with all of you. So before we get into the trip, I thought I would let the fellow members of our pilgrimage group introduce themselves to you. Many of you may know them, but some of you may not. So maybe if Richard, if you wouldn't mind starting, and we'll go down the line, and just so you know who all is speaking.
Richard Foster.
Charles Holmes.
Kathy McKenzie, and I guess we were meant to say a little bit about ourselves. I've been coming to St. Bart's for about 22 years, involved in a number of committees and initiatives, and chair of the Mid-Manhattan Performing Arts Foundation, so please come to our next concert.
I'm Rob Radtke. I've been a member of St. Bart's for probably almost 35 years now. Since I moved to New York, we've raised our daughter here, my wife and I, Mary, and have been active in many, many different parts of this wonderful community.
Flora Ferrara, and we've been at St. Bart's for 12 years.
I think it's 10 years. I'm Jamie Ferrara. I'm Flora's lesser half. We came here 10 years ago. I'm on the vestry. It's my last year on the vestry. And we were so glad to be on this trip.
Well, thank you all. This group of seven were 35% of the 20 pilgrims that went from St. Bart's. That included active parishioners of St. Bart's and friends of St. Bart's, or the other pilgrims. And we went on this ancient pilgrimage path to Santiago de Compostela, to the cathedral there, which houses what are believed to be the remains of St. James, the apostle who walked alongside Jesus. This is a path that for centuries pilgrims have taken to that cathedral to see the relics and to pay tribute to St. James. And it's a path that has been memorialized in movies, in books, etc. And increasingly over more recent years, folks have taken for all kinds of reasons, not just to see the relics of St. James. And to talk a little bit more about this pilgrimage and why a group from St. Bart's went on this path, I'm going to turn it over to Rob to remind us of an installment of the Forum from 2 years ago when he talked about his sabbatical trip on the Camino.
Yes, thank you, Peter. That's exactly right. I was fortunate enough in 2022 to be granted a sabbatical. And as I was thinking about what it was that I wanted to do during my sabbatical, I landed upon the idea of walking the what's known as the Camino Frances, which is the French path, which starts in the Pyrenees Mountains and goes to Santiago de Compostela. It's about 500 miles. And because my employer was kind enough to allow me to do this, I used it as a fundraising opportunity and raised quite a bit of money for my organization, which is a nonprofit organization. And in the process, many people sitting in this room, many people probably watching online, were generous enough to contribute to the fundraising effort and followed quite extensively. I blogged a lot about it. I posted quite a bit in social media. And when I got back, Peter invited me to come and do a forum here at St. Bart's to talk about the Camino, which I did. And afterwards, a number of people came up to me and said, do you think it would ever be possible for St. Bart's to do a Camino? And so, I don't know, about 6-8 weeks later, Peter and I got together, had breakfast or lunch, and cooked up the idea of doing a mini Camino. We realized we couldn't possibly do the 500-mile Camino for people, but we figured we could do 2 weeks would be probably the maximum that we could do. And it took us about 18 months to plan it, to get the itinerary worked out and to recruit people for it. Although I will say recruiting people for it proved to be quite straightforward. I think we had registration open for 2 weeks at most before it filled up with many, many people from St. Bart's, and as Peter alluded to, people from, oddly enough, other parts of my life who had supported my original fundraising effort for my Camino in 2022. So that's the sort of the genesis of it. For those of you who don't know, the Camino de Santiago is one of the 3 main Christian pilgrimage sites, Jerusalem, Rome, and Camino de Santiago. And I've sort of made it a little bit of a practice to visit all 3 Christian pilgrimage sites on a fairly regular basis, either through the work that I do or as part of tourism. And this was my second visit on this pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, but I'm sure it's not my last.
And I just want to take the opportunity to thank Rob. Technically speaking, Rob and I were co-leading this pilgrimage, but really Rob did everything. And I can't say enough about his meticulous organizational skills that made sure that we were all in the right place. He was tracking us all as we were getting to Spain, and he had the connection to the company that helped organize our trip called Follow the Camino, and the other person that we have to thank a ton is right here in the center. His name is Fran, and he was our guide. He was with us the entire trip, and between Fran and Rob, I had to do nothing, and I am so very grateful. So what we thought we'd do is show you some photos of our trip so you can see it, go over our itinerary and the different stops we took. Then I'll have some general questions for my fellow pilgrims, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of us. And I'll invite my fellow pilgrims to chime in as you would like as we go along. We met for the first time in the city of León. Many of us flew into Madrid and then found our own way to León, and we met for the first time as a group in León. I had not been aware of this absolutely stunning cathedral in the city of León, which I think is one of the reasons why Rob wanted us to start there. And you have some photos here of this beautiful cathedral that we got to spend a lot of time around. We had a few days in León to start to kind of acclimate ourselves to get over the jet lag before we started walking. Again, some photos of the cathedral. And here are some other photos of León. We have a picture. St. Bartholomew was our companion some of the time, and Jamie took this great picture of St. Bartholomew from the choir in the cathedral. This is our first photo that I think we took as a group at dinner the very first night, once everyone had assembled. And we were able to have a kind of starting Eucharist in a chapel. We stayed in an old monastic space that had been turned into an inn, and there was a little chapel there where we had a Eucharist to set us off on our journey. Anything you all want to say about León meeting together as a group for the first time?
Well, this is one of the rare pictures of Peter working. And he said he didn't do anything, but in fact, this Eucharist really sort of set us up for the entire trip. And many of us still remember his sermon, which was, what does this mean for you, this pilgrimage, and can we actually make our way for the next couple of weeks with less baggage than we normally have? And some of us managed, and some of us almost managed.
I would say also the art museums in León were pretty amazing, the Contemporary Art Museum specifically. We kind of wondered, I think, why we got there so early, but in the end, it was just really nice to get together with everyone and get to know everyone a little bit and really spend some time wandering around. Also, October 12th was a holiday in Spain for the conquering of South America. So it was kind of nice to be there when it was very jubilant and festive time.
And for me, it was very beautiful on the Eucharist on Sunday to have a bulletin that Peter had made that looked just like our bulletin here at St. Bart's that we have on Sundays, and that was a lovely moment.
All right. So from León, did you want to say anything, Rob? Okay. From León, we took a bus to our real starting place, which was Ponferrada. This was one of the larger cities that we stopped in. This is our, on the left is the shot just before we started walking. At our first briefing, we had a briefing every single morning where Fran would tell us about the terrain that lay ahead and what we could look for. This is the picture of our group just as we were starting to walk in front of the Knights Templar kind of fortress in Ponferrada. Here's a directional sign. These were all along the way. You'll see some of Richard and Jamie are wearing the scallop shells, which are traditionally associated with the Camino. And the scallop shell, these blue and yellow signposts along the way help us be assured that we were on the right track. We also had an app, some of us, because there are Camino apps now, to make sure that we were on the right track. But especially as we got closer to Santiago, there were plenty of other pilgrims, so we weren't really alone for most of the time, and it was hard to lose your way, although it did happen to one or two of us. We had to walk through urban Ponferrada for a while, so it wasn't super scenic at first, but then we got a taste of the wonderful scenery of Spain once we got a few miles out. Anything you all want to say about day one? All right. The day two of walking was from, we arrived at a town called Villafranca, and then we went from Villafranca to Ocebrerio. And I think you all would all agree that day two was our hardest day. I think we walked about 18 miles on day two with a pretty steep incline at the end. We crossed over to Galicia, and one of the learnings for me was how important regions are in Spain. And there were kind of a lot of moves for regional independence and autonomy, and we got a taste of that. So moving from one region to another was a bigger deal than I might have anticipated. And then we had some uphill there at the end. We received a lot of rain on this trip. We were wet a lot of the time. I think it rained 6 of our 10 walking days, and it rained for many of us as we were climbing this very steep hill to Ocebrerio.
I think it's an understatement. I was I was wet all the way through, and I was the person who veered off the track and ended up walking 22 miles that day. And it was really traumatic, I have to say. I missed a sign because there was construction, and I ended up in this spot, and I was like, this can't possibly be right. And so it was I walked actually very slowly, and I walked alone a lot of the time, although I did walk with old friends, new friends, and I met really interesting people along the way. But getting lost and feeling really alone was terrible. And I met a farmer the last 2 kilometers when I finally decided I had to turn around and go back. And he was just he couldn't speak English, I couldn't speak Spanish, but his whole thing was what are you doing? You're here alone, and it's pouring, and I'm like, I'll be okay, and I just kept going. So it was once we finally arrived at this very medieval city, and everyone was gathered, it was just so awesome to have a group to meet up with. So I kind of not sure how people who do this by themselves manage, actually.
And if I can add, flying into Madrid on the National Independence Day, a city of 3.5 million people, 3 or 4 days later, we're walking the longest walk of the Camino into this medieval village of less than 200 people. It's raining, we're tired, but we were welcomed with open arms, and it was, I think, my favorite of all the places we stayed was Ocebrerio.
Go ahead.
I was also just going to add, as well as it being between 18 and 20 miles, and very steep, but very varied terrain. So some of the time it was like that, sort of paths or cobbles, and some of the time it was up steep hills through woods, which were pretty muddy. So it was challenging, not just the distance, but what we were walking on.
And this photo in the center is of dinner that night, and you can tell we are all very relieved to be inside and to be dry and to be eating. Ocebreiro is known in the region for a special kind of cheese, which many of us tasted at dinner that night, and had a wonderful experience. And we were in this very small, misty village on the top of the hills. And here's a picture from the next morning. There are these distinctive huts in the village, a few of which still exist, and we walked by in the morning. we went from Os Sobrero to Triacastella on our third day of walking. And I would say what stood out to me about day 3 was how much we had to walk downhill. And Rob and Fran were very clear with us from the beginning that the downhills, you wouldn't expect it, are sometimes just as challenging, if not more challenging, than the uphills. And I don't know about you all, but I certainly had that experience of the downhills were actually more painful for me than the uphills. Anything about day 3 anyone wants to share? So from Triacastella, we went to Sarria, and Sarria is the typical starting place for pilgrims who are going a short distance, because from Sarria to Santiago de Compostela, you do the minimum amount of distance needed to get a certificate saying that you've done the Camino. So day 4 was kind of the last day in which it was calmer on the paths. Traffic picked up after Sarria. I included some photos of the livestock that we saw a lot of along the way, and every now and then you would get into a traffic jam where you had to kind of wait for the cattle to go through. We saw a lot of farm animals as we went along. Anything?
I think before we got to Sarria, I can't remember exactly where on the trip, but one of the great things about the Camino is all those stops along the way to where you get, I think Charles brought his passport, but where you can get stamps and from churches or from these cafes. But one of the ones I stopped at was, I guess, sort of a hippie enclave where this young couple, Italian couple, it turned out, had created this labyrinth in the woods and out of stones, and it was like incredible. Like, I stopped there, my friend Ginger and I stopped there because we needed to use the restroom, which turned out to be a rudimentary outhouse, which we chose not to use. But but the whole vibe there was just like one of welcome, and they didn't, you could donate. They didn't have set payments for things, but they made us coffee, and they had a meditation room and all kinds of. It was just like totally in the spirit of what this pilgrimage was about, I think, as opposed to the more commercial stops. But it was just like completely beautiful experience.
Charles, do you want to say anything about what you brought along?
Sure. In order to get your certificate that you've completed the Camino, we did, I think, 220 kilometers. The minimum, as Peter mentioned, was 100 kilometers. But you needed to get 2 celos or stamps every day. And honestly, by I think the second or third day, I felt like it was a bunch of teenagers running around. Did you get your stamp today? Because you definitely wanted to get 2 stamps, and they were really very interesting, all different, and you would log in the date. And then we turned these into our guide, Fran, at the end, and he got us our certificates that showed that we had completed the entire Camino. In addition to being sure you have one of these, if you do choose to do the Camino, I would highly recommend you take a vicar along with you. It makes for a very pleasant experience to have Compline every night. It's a highlight for me, for sure.
There's a picture of Compline later on. We gathered every single night to have night prayer or Compline, and it was optional, but most people elected, and it was a great way to kind of end our day together. The sellos that you could get on the passport that you actually were required to get at least 2 a day, as Charles mentioned, you could get it at your hotel, your hostel. You could also get it at cafes along the way, and there's kind of a robust coffee culture along the way, although it's a lot cheaper than the coffee culture here in New York. You could often get a cappuccino for €1 or €2, and it was always something to look forward to, your next stop, where you could put down your bag for a bit, have a cup of coffee before you kept going along. So from Sarria, which was more of an urban center, we headed to Porto Marín. Porto Marín was, this is just some of the landscape along the way. There's the coffee that I mentioned that we would often stop and get. Porto Marín was a town that had to be displaced when a dam was being built. And they actually moved the entire town up the hill so that they could create the dam. So it was an interesting situation where it's an old town, but it's not in the place that it once was. And we ended up spending 2 days in Puerto Marin because we got a rest day, which was wise. We had walked about how many miles by that point? 60 or so. So we needed a little rest before going on the rest of the way. Anything you all want to say about day 5 or a rest day?
Just this church was particularly beautiful, and this was one that they had reconstructed from the lower town. And so you're looking from the northwest here, but on the southeast, that you could actually see the stones were numbered, and you could see how they put them back together. It was really quite. I think it's an 11th century church, but how carefully they had done it. It was really quite extraordinary. And this was the main sort of square, and you can see how prominent the church was. It was an absolutely charming town.
I think this is also where a lot of people bought sandals instead. Switched. There were a lot of foot problems. So.
We all dealt with various kinds of foot issues along the way, and so our guide Fran always hikes in sandals, which I don't think many of us thought of as a viable shoe to do this long walk on, but some switched to it in this town.
Just a historical footnote, this river was dammed up during the Franco era to create hydroelectric power, and it was, I think, the only positive comment I heard about the Franco era was that he did create these hydroelectric dams which still power a lot of Spain. This river also flows all the way to the Atlantic and creates, if I'm not mistaken, the border between Galicia and northwestern Spain and the northern end of Portugal.
Of course, as we arrived, it was raining, and so this photo was taken on this long bridge with a very narrow footpath across in the rain. But on our rest day, the sun came out, so Puerto Marin looked much more beautiful in the sun. On day 6 of walking, we headed to Palas de Rey. Along the way, we stopped at these old Celtic ruins, and this photo was taken right before it started raining again. I remember because I felt the first raindrop right after I took the photo. I wonder if fellow pilgrims want to talk about lodging. Our lodging was varied along the way, but we had some really nice stops. And in Palas de Rey, we stopped at a beautiful rural inn and had amazing food. And this is the picture from our dinner that evening. Anything you all want to say?
Yeah.
Peter's right. I mean, the accommodations varied from functional to quite lovely and commodious, as did some of the meals. Some of the meals were fuel, and some of the meals were, quite beautifully prepared gourmet farm-to-table things, and that's almost on purpose. I mean, you tend to really value the creature comforts after a day of walking uphill for 20 miles in the rain, there's a whole variety. Many people who walk the Camino stay in what are called albergues, which are essentially hostels, so multiple people in multiple rooms, dormitory style. That was not this. Everybody had their own room and their own bathroom and a roommate if they wanted one, but that was sort of the minimum requirement that I set for the travel company.
And we're grateful that he set that requirement.
And I would just add that, I mean, the couple of beautiful places that we stopped were a treat, but even the more basic places, as long as the water was hot, which it always was, because you didn't get there until, well, depending how fast you walk, sort of later in the afternoon, and as long as the shower was hot and it was clean, you had dinner, you went to bed, and you got up the next morning and left again at 7:30 or 8. So you didn't really need to be in a beautiful place with fabulous lounges and so on. But it was very lovely to have those 2 nights that were in very elegant places.
Yeah, and I would just say, well, I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but even in the less gorgeous accommodations, the fact that you had hot showers at the end and that it was warm was so comforting. But then you thought, well, they've been doing this for 1,000 years, and in the 12th century and 13th and 14th century, they didn't have hot showers, and pilgrims would be on the road for sometimes 2 years. So how did they do it? I mean, we thought this was challenging for 2 weeks. How did those folks do it without even these kinds of other, what we would consider very basic creature comforts? It was quite humbling in that way.
Yeah, when we got to Santiago, there was a museum of pilgrimage that many of us went to and found really interesting, and thinking precisely as Jamie said about the differential between our experience, which felt quite challenging at some times after 18 miles walking through the rain. They had it much harder centuries ago. This is a photo of us having night prayer compline, which we did pretty much any place we could find. Many of the hotels we stayed in had rooms that we could use, but one night we were in a very narrow corridor and we said compline there. We made sure to do it wherever we were.
I think, was this the night the women from Denver?
No, that was in early, a few nights earlier, yeah.
Yeah, there were some miraculous St. Bart's connections. I guess we became infamous as the group of 19 people walking. And so when you introduce yourself to someone and say, I'm walking with this group, they're like, oh, are you with the St. Bart's group? And so it turned out somebody in our group met these two women who were sisters from Denver, and their father is buried here. So that was pretty amazing. So they did compline with us, which was great.
Yeah. So day 7, we had sunny weather, which was lovely, and we ended in a town called Melide. And from there, we went to Arzua, and here we had some lovely weather on day 8 as well, and you can see Jamie standing next to a model of a pilgrim from another time. Day 9, and it was in Arzua that we had probably what I think we would all agree is the nicest accommodation and a really lovely meal. A beautiful pool, although it was way too cold to swim in.
Yeah, that place was incredible. It was called the 1930 Boutique Hotel, and the wallpaper.
I didn't get a wallpaper picture in here.
The wallpaper in every room was pretty fantastic.
We had a WhatsApp group between the pilgrims, and everyone sent pictures of the wallpaper in their bathrooms to one another.
Right, and the proprietor of this hotel, actually my friend Ginger and I were looking for a restaurant, which I think he sent us to the restaurant he owned as well, which was fantastic. But then he also recommended restaurants for us in Santiago, which we went to a couple of those. So they were great.
Right. Day 9, we're almost there. Another day of mostly good weather, although of course it started to rain as we were all getting to our destination. And then finally, on the final day of walking, this is our final briefing with Fran. Again, he would brief us every morning. We ended up at Monte de Gozo, is that right? Which is the kind of final mountain where you can first see the cathedral. And this is a shot of the view of the cathedral, which if you squint, you can see in the distance from that mountain. Then we walked through the streets of Santiago and ended up at the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela. Do any of you want to share what it was like to finally reach the cathedral?
It was, do you guys want to start? It was completely overwhelming and emotional in a way that I didn't really expect. I mean, I cry all the time, but, but it was just like you're overcome. There's just people hugging. I think when Fran started hugging everyone, just like I just couldn't hold back the tears anymore. And it was just like this huge sense of togetherness, and yeah, it was fantastic.
Here we are at the cathedral. You can see a very ornate Baroque work inside the cathedral, even though the cathedral itself is much older than that. Jamie is in line to get in to see the Shrine of St. James. And then on the right is a photo of our certificates that we got. So Fran collected all of our passports, took them to the pilgrimage office, and then these certificates were created there in Latin, and even our names are in a Latin form, and that this is proof that we have done the Camino.
I'll just, on the left here, you can see this great baldachin which overall the baldachin actually was kind of atrociously ugly, but there's this sort of bust of St. James kind of hidden in the back. And for many people on the Camino, the end of it is actually going up and embracing this statue and saying a quick prayer. And I found just the tears flowing down. I mean, they had a guard there, so it used to be that you would kind of really cuddle the statue and kiss it, and there's no kissing now for health reasons, which is good. But it was just, and the line there, you can't tell, but it was at least 300 people long. And you go down and you actually see the reliquary where his bones are, and then you go up and embrace the statue. And it was the sense of doing this as millions of people had done it was quite overwhelming. It was really beautiful.
We were also fortunate enough to attend a pilgrim mass at, I don't know whether you were about to talk about that, Peter, or not. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You explain it, Rob. There's the network of information among the guides. So Fran was able to learn they have several pilgrim masses a day where all of the folks who have converged on Santiago de Compostela, who have been pilgrims on one of the various routes, have come together and they attend a mass. In our case, there were groups from all over. Roman Catholic groups, their priests got to go up and participate in the mass. The cathedral was full. We actually got there 30 to 45 minutes early to get a seat, which I'm glad we did. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had seats. But Fran was able to find out that this particular pilgrim mass used what's called the bota fumerio, which is a giant incense censer. So I have a little video of, you can see the guys who put this giant thurible together, and then it swings. You'll see just a little bit of the swinging in this video, but it actually went on for several minutes, accompanied by grand music. They're kind of coming together to assemble the thurible. All of the cameras are ready to capture this moment. See it swing there. So the swinging gets quite dramatic and goes on for several minutes.
And
so that was a kind of cool.
There are about 4 or 5 men who,
monks actually, they're monks. The monks.
In these very traditional costumes that pull these ropes. So together they pull it and it goes up and then it swings.
If you can imagine something hanging from the dome in St. Bart's and swinging basically from the altar all the way to about halfway down the nave. I mean, it was absolutely fantastic. I had never seen anything like it. It was, and it's not something that's done at every mass. So we were very fortunate that our guide was able to get information about which one to go to, because otherwise you could. The last time I went a couple times, and it was not. They were not going to swing it. They never announce in advance when they're going to do it, and so we were really lucky to have that opportunity.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and photography was forbidden, by the way. They had guards in advance making everyone put their cameras away, but as soon as it started.
Yeah, you can see that we all listened to that.
And the structure that housed the ropes to create the bota fumerio to swing was put in place in 1607, if I'm correct on that date. And the purpose was that the pilgrims who arrived had not had hot showers historically, and the incense was to sort of clear the air and maybe kill a few lice or something. But as Rob said, I have a friend who I learned about the Camino years ago, and she's led 7 different small groups on the Camino. And when I told her what we had seen, she said in her 7 trips, she's only seen it once. So it really was a privilege for us to get to see it.
The final thing I wanted to make sure to mention about our arrival in Santiago, we got to spend several days there, is we got to visit the Anglican Pilgrimage Center in Santiago, which is very new and actually created by several friends of St. Bart's. The co-founder of the Pilgrim Center is Nancy Mead, who's the wife of the former rector of St. Thomas a few blocks away, who kind of championed this center and has built it with some other friends. And Robert Willis, who died actually while we were on the pilgrimage, was on the board of the Pilgrim Center in Santiago de Compostela, and his partner Fletcher is on the board as well. So there were a lot of great connections. These pictures were taken from the church that the Pilgrim Center gets to use in Santiago de Compostela, and we had a priest from the Church of England who was visiting. We got to meet the Anglican Bishop of Spain, who said hi to us before he had to go elsewhere. And then there was a visiting archdeacon from the Church of England who presided at the Eucharist and was assisted by me and Christine, who was a priest, friend of Rob's, who joined us from the trip from California. So we got to celebrate Eucharist all together in Santiago de Compostela, and we took this final picture of the whole group. Anything else you all want to say about our arrival?
Santiago is a great city. Just, even if you're not a pilgrim, it was really a great place to walk around. Excellent restaurants.
And at the coffee hour after the 11, if you'd like, I can tell you the story of how I learned even more deeply the power of prayer in Santiago de Compostela. But I won't take time to share that right now. Let's just say Meredith Ward had a role in that story. So we have some time for questions. If you're here in the room, you can raise your hand and you'll get a question card. Suzanne's going to come around and she'll bring those questions up to me. If you're joining us online, you can type your questions into the live chat on YouTube, the comments on Facebook, or you can email me, pthompson@stbarts.org, and a special hello to our fellow pilgrims who might be joining us online. While we're waiting for those questions, do you want to say anything?
I was just going to say, if there are any fellow pilgrims online, if you want to send a quick message into Peter or with a comment, that would be lovely as well.
We'd love to greet you in front of everyone.
We had people from all over the country, so many of them couldn't be here today, obviously.
So while we're waiting for the questions to come in, I wonder if the 6 of you might like to reflect on to the extent to which this pilgrimage was a pilgrimage for you, as opposed to just a tourist trip or a long walk. What was religious or not about this journey? We had pilgrims come for all kinds of reasons, as pilgrims always have embarked on the Camino for all kinds of reasons. For you all personally, to what extent was this a journey of faith?
I guess for me, I kind of, we had like a year to prepare for this journey. And I bought a book by Thich Nhat Hanh called How to Walk. And it was basically a book of meditations, which I read through over the year. But actually, the meditations didn't work for me until I was actually on the Camino. And twice in this book, he says something like, walk as though your feet are kissing the earth, which is really hard to do, actually. And some of us contributed to the blogs, and I wrote about this, that actually it was much easier to do that when the terrain was difficult. And the other thing so for me it was like actually slowing down and being in the moment, and everyone will tell you I was the last one every day to arrive, except one day. And that's because I just really wanted to be in the moment, and it's not something I'm good at. And but in the aftermath of this trip, So to the extent that that's religious, I can go back to that place. I can be in the woods or on that trail, and not the ugly parts, because I'm trying to forget those parts. But most of it was really beautiful and really varied terrain, and looking at the plants up close, there were really amazing acorns that I've never seen before. And just taking time to stop and think. And but I thought it was going to be about different things. I thought it was going to be about reevaluating my life, or reprioritizing, or thinking about changes that might be happening. And in the end, that wasn't what it was about at all.
So on reflection, it felt very much like St. Bart's in a way. We were this little community, and we had newcomers and people who had been members for a long time. And we were very comfortable together, and you didn't need to be with everybody all the time, all day, every day. We walked sometimes alone. We walked in groups. You had deep conversations along the way, and often you walked alone and could take in the scenery and the, you say, the acorns, incredible trees. And so that was, but it felt like this sort of radical welcome, this group within our, within this little group of 19, and we were our own little community. So it felt very comfortable, and you met new people, and you got to know them, you got to know old friends more deeply, and you could just be together. It was very comfortable.
And I would say that, echoing what others have said, for me, many days, the highlight was Compline. I mean, coming together, whatever had happened during the day, however rainy it had been, however scared or alone you would have been, coming together in this little group that you knew and that sort of you embraced each other. Even though it wasn't a Eucharist, it felt like a Eucharist. I mean, this was really a great Thanksgiving, and kind of got you charged up for the next day and whatever it might hold. And it really felt like St. Bart's in miniature. It was great.
Anyone else?
So for me, I don't think I would call anything that I experienced specifically religious, although, as Flora said, we were this community. And so my personal experience was that I learned about sharing love, a form of love, with my 19 fellow travelers. And it is, and God and Jesus are about love, so I guess it is religious, you know. And for me personally, it was about receiving love. And that was the strongest sort of personal experience from the whole trip for me.
I'll add, and many of the same comments that have already been said. When I started thinking about the Camino, I only knew two of the people that were going. I knew Rob and Peter, and my anticipation was that I would walk alone every day, but I would be with this group in the evening, and that hopefully along the way, as I would keep a journal and walk alone, and there would be some maybe spiritual epiphany. The epiphany that I had was that I was with this wonderful group of people that all became close friends. And while I did walk probably half of the 200 plus kilometers alone, I walked at least a few hours with every single person that was with us and got to be friends. And that was, I guess, the epiphany for me. And as Jamie said, one of my favorite parts was really Compline every night, to share that closing prayer with the people that you'd shared the day with.
So a lot of great questions. We won't get to all of them. There are a number of questions about the physical experience of the Camino. Can you talk about what it was like physically? We all trained in advance of this. I mean, I've done marathons before, but I trained specifically to do the Camino. Do you want to talk about training, what it was like physically to do all these miles and recover from them?
So I worked with a personal trainer, which was super helpful, just working on my issues, which were flexibility and balance mostly. And I think the most I walked before the trip was 11 miles. But I also had a foot injury in the spring, so I actually recovered from that, but I experienced the pain I expected to experience. But I think the uphills were not hard. It was definitely the downhills, and mostly I traversed those the way you would doing skiing. And actually, the Camino felt kind of like skiing in a way, like everybody was there with their hiking poles, but no skis, and it was very communal. And like others have said, actually, the whole Camino is like church. Everyone's totally open. You just talk to strangers. I spent a whole day walking with this lovely woman from Malaysia whose mother had died, which is why she was doing it. And you hear people's stories, and it was totally incredible. But the physical, I think beyond the physical, it wasn't so much the walking, it was the rain. Changed. And if somebody had said you're going to walk 15 miles a day and it's going to rain every day, all kinds of rain, sprinkling rain, torrential rain, I think I might not have signed up, actually.
I think we'd done what we thought was quite a lot of training, clearly not enough, but to be so aware of your feet. At the end of the day, and you took your shoes off and you you really sort of examined your feet and rubbed them with whatever potions and lotions you were using. And it was a sort of new awareness. We take our feet for granted. We walk in New York all the time, but you really had to be careful and to make sure that you were going to make it. And we had from people who had no problems to blisters to more significant toenail issues, which resulted in having to buy sandals.
Anyone else? I have to say, this group was in great shape. Fran said, Americans, Peter, usually take a lot of taxis. And that wasn't true for our group. People walked, and I don't know if Sarah Bessie's in the room or not, but Sarah and her cousin Jamie were just trucking along every single day. This is a group that was in great shape and walked really well.
So I'm sorry. Just about Sarah. There was a small group. They would get up at 6 a.m. with their headlights before dawn and be out there, in the dark with no guide. And they'd often be the first to arrive, and they'd be sipping coffee and sort of greeting everybody as we came. But it was just it was extraordinary how sort of revved up they were to do this. I thought it was a little crazy at first, but they were there. So hats off to Sarah, because she often led that group.
I was on the hardest day when we're all climbing up to Osiburo. I'm trying to be in touch with people through WhatsApp and looking and counting noses, who's checked into the hotel, who hasn't yet. And it was getting dark, and I began sending out WhatsApp messages to the missing people on the trip. To make sure you're safe, or saying, this is the last town where you can actually catch a taxi if you want to catch a taxi. And invariably, people texted back or wrote back and said, I did not come to quit. I came to walk. And I just was so proud of everybody who did that. Every single person made it. And that was not foretold when you do it with a group. And Peter's right. Fran, the guide, I remember the first briefing that night when we were all in the town where we were going to leave the next morning. He said, listen to your body. Your body will tell you what you need to do. And he was absolutely right. And I think in our life, at least I'll speak for myself. In my life, I don't listen to my body on a day-to-day basis. It's something I take completely for granted, that I will be able to put my shoes on in the morning and do what I need to do. And that's not true when you're walking the Camino. I would get up a half an hour early. I would make sure I had bandaged my foot the proper way, that the blisters had been properly isolated, that nothing was infected. And it's a real mind shift. I think that for our early 21st century, I guess now mid-21st century lives, is a really important learning for me.
And there was something refreshing about just having to get up in the morning and only walk, not have to tackle a huge to-do list for the day. We had to get from one place to another. That was really refreshing for me. That's all I had to do that day. It was a lot, and yet it was only one thing, which was wonderful. So we are almost out of time. Very, very quickly, how have you changed because of your Camino experience?
I'll go. I don't know that I've changed that radically, but I do have a lot more friends here at St. Bartholomew's, which I'm very pleased. And I will definitely do another Camino. It may not be in the next year or two, but I'll definitely do another Camino. And at that point, I might actually tackle it on my own. I would not want my first experience to be alone. I'm grateful that I was with this wonderful group.
Yeah, I had the good fortune to spend 2 weeks with my college roommate. She came on the trip. And so we haven't spent that much intense time together in a really long time. And so for me, it was about, not rekindling or reigniting, because we have been connected for 35 years, but just really evaluating all the relationships in my life and what they mean to me, and how important it is to be present with people.
Yeah, sort of picking up on what Kathy said, for me it was an extremely unusual experience because I had people from all different eras of my life on this trip. All of our St. Bartholomew's friends, but I had one person who was in graduate school with me. So it was this, and people who served on the board of the organization that I'm a part of, people who used to work at the organization I worked at before I came to the Episcopal Relief and Development where I work now. So it was a little bit of like, this is your life, Rob Radtke experience, and I was extremely apprehensive. Because these are very different circles. The Venn diagram of this group was not there, right? There was not a lot of overlap. And I have to say, I came away from it just feeling so cherished and so appreciative of the people whose paths have crossed mine over the years, either literally on the Camino or more figuratively. And so I think it gave me a deeper appreciation for the richness of, if you want to know how I've changed, the deeper appreciation for the richness of the community that has formed me.
Yeah, my word would be community. I came to realize almost viscerally how I feel most alive in a community and how that community changes, but that even as some of us are sort of aging more or less gracefully, that those relationships, there can be new relationships, there can be deeper relationships. It formed part of my New Year's resolutions, which I probably won't keep, but that sense of real being fully alive as in community is what I think I would take with me.
The community was, I think, a key aspect, and being with all these folks, getting a chance to step away was so important, and I really appreciated it. So we do have to stop. I want to say a huge thank you to my fellow pilgrims, those who are in the room, and those who didn't make it today. And another big thanks to Rob, who really made this whole trip happen. Thank you all for being here. We hope you'll stick around and join us for worship at 11 a.m. There is a special virtual-only edition of the forum tomorrow at 6 p.m. Dartmouth professor Randall Ballmer, who has written a biography of Jimmy Carter, will be talking about Jimmy Carter's faith as we approach his state funeral this week. Next week, I will be away, but Zach will be here with one of the founders of the organization Braver Angels, which is working to combat polarization in our current political climate. So see you next week.